she jumps in, then hop right in. All right, so we're going to call the meeting to order at 6:37. I'm going to read a land acknowledgement that the Board of Directors supported. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples. We have lived in the Salish Sea Basin, throughout the San Juan Islands, and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. And now I'll pass it over to Kara to read an anti-racist statement.
This is the SVCA Board of Directors anti-racism statement. In response to recent racially motivated harassment of an SVCA board member, as a Board of Directors, we are compelled to make the following statement. The Sudden Valley Community Association, SVCA, stands against racism and in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We acknowledge that the history of systemic oppression, white supremacy, and racism has widespread effects in our society to this day. In light of such systemic racism and standing in explicit opposition to these realities, we strive to create an inclusive community where the dignity of all members is equally defended. We believe that the vast majority of SVCA members share these values, and we will continually advocate for the voice of every member to be heard and respected. Despite widespread consensus, we have come to realize that it is not enough to assume that all members share these values. This conviction must be affirmed publicly. Therefore, we reject the expressions of racism that seek to divide this community. We contend that until we can say with confidence and without repudiation that Black Lives Matter in our society, there is much work to be done with respect to ensuring equal treatment for the BIPOC members of our community. Whenever possible and necessary, we will actively engage in difficult, transparent conversations and commit in dismantling racial biases by understanding and seeking to change barriers that have been created. We will also continually ensure that all voices are heard in an inclusive, respectful, responsible, cooperative, and equitable environment. In this regard, expressions of policy and priority differences are welcomed, but we do not consider racism to be a political opinion, and we will not tolerate it. We are committed to supporting community members and staff through an equity and anti-racist lens and advocating for any change that cultivates a more just environment.
Thank you, Kara. All right, roll call. We are missing Kim tonight and Jean. So keep moving forward. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, first item on the agenda is approval of the last meeting's minutes. We can just do this as if there's any objections. If there's none, then they'll be approved by acclamation.
No objections.
All right, we can move on then to the capital requests, and I will pass it over to Glenn to discuss those.
All right, thank you. So we have two requests in front of you tonight. I'll start with the first one on the list, which is the roads repairs request. It is for $10,000, and this is I mean, most of you haven't seen this before and gone through this process, and neither have I. AJ certainly has. But we're making a little bit of a change. We're working to do this in phases so that you're approving specific items. So this first one is just to get our roads repair list created by a consultant and and to get bid documents ready. So and can I share? Is this all share? AJ? I think
yes, I think you can.
Okay, thanks, John. I'm going to share. I just got this today, so that's why you didn't see it in advance. but we put $10,000 in, and P&W Services, who does ours. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. I met with them yesterday, and they put this estimate together, and this is what it'll take for them to look at all of our road repairs for the year, which he's calling pothole repairs, but there are some that are a little more extensive than potholes. So what this will get us is they'll look at all of the streets. They'll help us prioritize, and what I've asked is we want to do as many and all if we can to get caught up. So this is the price he gave us for that. Gave us a little contingency, so we may or may not spend that $500 on extra work. The reason I put 10,000 in, I knew it would come somewhere between 5 and 7, but I wanted to make sure that if something pops up as he's looking at things that is unexpected, that we have to do some design work for or something, we had that covered. But if we don't, we'll only spend this part. And then the idea is that we bring back, when we bid it and we get a contractor, we bring that back as a request as well to the finance committee first and then the board. So you'll see what the actual cost of the project will be when you're approving it, and you'll be able to ask any questions about what we're doing. We'll also have a project list that's included in that. When we talk the schedule, we're well within our schedule to make sure that we can get the work done at this point. So before I move to the next one, any questions, comments?
Well, I think we would need to discuss this one first, right? And then,
Yeah, that's the way I was going to do them, is not get them confused and let you talk about it. And then I'll move to the next one.
Okay. So just kind of a clarification. One thing I've talked with Glenn about as the president, and kind of coming in and talking about our operations and kind of how we handle things. Some of our tracking mechanisms for our projects like this are a bit scattered and all over. One thing I'd like to see us do is be able to track a project from conception all the way to, construction completion and closeout. And one thing I've been talking with Glenn about is, you kind of have 3 phases of a project. You have a development phase, like what are you going to do with the project? What's all of it going to entail? Everything like that. Then you have a design phase to kind of get everything ramped up, any plans that need to be created, contract documents, bid documents that have to get created to go out to be advertised. Then you have your construction phase where you're hiring a contractor to come in and do the actual work. And so what I've discussed with him is a process of, like, we do an initial, this is kind of the initial request of money for this project. Then you'll see a change order later on that adds additional money to this project for when we move into design phase or construction phase. And then that change order will keep track of our projects as we move along, and we will have a complete tracking mechanism for capturing total project costs over the life of the project. And so, yeah, I don't know. Is there any questions about the capital request process? This being kind of our first discussion on this. Typically the finance committee kind of hashes through, asks questions. They usually make a motion to recommend or not recommend to the board, basically. And so that's kind of then the historical process of how we handle this.
So AJ, following up on your tracking question. So we're asking for an allocation from the capital roads fund to the general fund?
It would be the capital roads fund, yes.
To the operations general
Instead of
operation?
operations, yes, we have a capital roads fund for
Right.
these types of projects. And, what I've talked with Glenn about is we have a number of roads that have delamination issues where the asphalt's kind of separating, basically along the layers of asphalt. And then we have pothole issues or what they call alligator cracking. These are all issues we have to resolve before we can do an overlay of those roads. Or you resolve them and then resolve them as part of an overlay project. With everything we have kind of going on, and stuff, I want to make sure we try to keep a roads project going, and our culvert projects going. The opportunity costs of missing construction years on those projects, which are necessities for our community. We all need our roads to get to and from our homes, are kind of, been high on my priority list of things that we need to keep moving forward.
Right. So my question is, if it doesn't cost $10,000 and we're transferring the money into a different fund, if we don't spend that, it will be put back in the roads fund, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can make a motion tonight to go with PNW's cost estimate if that's what we wanted to do, and then tell
Certainly.
Glenn he needs to come back with a change order if he needs more money after that to do more work. This is all kind of the process that we work through tonight as a committee when we formulate our recommendation to the board. Me personally, when I look at it, I kind of would like to maybe go that route. Or maybe you give a little bit more contingency up to like $6,000 or something, as just a little bit buffer.
I have a question, since I have my hand up, but it's a black screen. So,
Yep, go ahead.
just really quickly, so you've gone beyond just a consideration of the offer from PNW to do this initial, surveillance, correct? You've tried to lay out the whole process of dealing with roads in your tracking system, correct?
Well, there's going to have to be a much bigger, a bigger investigation with all of the roads, and we're going to have to develop a capital paving plan over time. If you look back at our roads capital planning documents, it just kind of outlines like main, secondary roads and stuff like that. It doesn't get into the specifics of when each of our roads will be dealt with and what years those exactly would be. It's left fairly vague. Leaves a lot of community members kind of being like, well, when's my road going to be fixed if their road's bad? If their road's fine, they don't think about it. The tracking mechanism is for specifically for a project. It doesn't even have to be a roads project. Let's say, we're going to move forward on another project for something else. You want to try to track that project's entire costs over its lifetime. So you're capturing a total cost for that project at the end that we can give to the community.
Okay, and in your view, though, you are proposing or thinking that we would hire a consultant to do the tracking system, is that correct? Or a consultant for each major project as they come up? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. We do not have the in-house expertise to design and bid all these projects necessarily. That's always a possibility in the future or something like that, but at the moment.
So you see the PNW as like a bird's eye view. I mean, this is just a quick total encapsulation of the whole scope, but not a whole lot of detail.
This is
PNW is our project engineer. Basically, he's giving us a cost estimate here. This 5,643 that Glenn has on the screen is a cost estimate to start developing the project, figuring out which of our roads have, very substandard conditions and figuring out how to deal with those ones in particular first. And then there'll have to be another plan. There'll be other capital requests and stuff later on as we further develop a roads capital plan. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I got it. Just wanted to clarify that you've moved the discussion beyond just consideration of this one document that we're looking at. That's all, to understand the view here.
Something that would be helpful for evaluating both this and future requests would be some sense of what are typical numbers. I know we didn't get multiple bids, but for example, I'm not familiar with this type of work. I have no idea if this is like a great deal or 3x what we expect.
And we certainly will do that when we're not, especially when we're not using somebody we have under contract already. So as an example, we've got a couple of other requests that'll be coming to you either this next month or the month after that are very, very specific, and we are getting 3 bids because we need to. So we'll provide each of those so you can see why we chose which one. This one is, and AJ can speak to the value of this one. It is pretty good, and I understand you don't have the context, but that's really why we only did it this way, why you only see one. Most times you will see at least 2. We'll request 3 at all times.
So to make sure I heard you correctly, the reason this time is because P&W was already under contract before we had a chance to approve this?
No, they are on a contract with us year to year. So they do some of this work for us. They already went through the process of choosing them before any of us got here. So they've just become our consultant who does this work for us. And that's pretty typical. A lot of times what you'll do though is every 2-3 years, you actually go out and we do a competitive process for them. So eventually we'll ask P&W and other consultants to give us another bid package on a contract. That's kind of how that evolves. And we have a number of those who do that kind of work for us. And then we bid them separately, and then they help us build our capital program.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, Tyler was hired as a result of the projects in 2018-19 with the surf loan, and he kind of did all the project management for the pool construction, the marina stuff that got done. And then he's been kind of he was hired on by Joe to kind of just fill that role as like our lead project manager, but he's an outside consultant who does that.
Yeah.
Is kind of the way that relationship has unfolded. And so, yeah, that's why it's similar to like if we would have in-house staff who did this, they would just request the capital funds and then give you a cost estimate of what in-house staff would cost to do this. Previously, we used to use Wilson Engineering for this type of stuff, and we used them for a long time, like decades. And then we've switched to P&W since then. And then, yeah, like Glenn said, going through that competitive bid process every few years is important. Dean?
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm a little late, so if this was gone over, I apologize, but does this feed into, so I've got this Sudden Valley capital project report. It's got all roads on it. It was from part of the packet that we received for today's meeting. And does this feed into any of that report that I have, this capital projects report? It's got money in for wall design, resurfacing, foundation, pothole repairs. So it's got money in it for things like that, it looks like.
The capital report is like when we initiate a new project, which is what this is, it'll get added to that list, and that's our tracking spreadsheet of all of our open capital projects, basically. Or, you know, not all of them are projects. Sometimes a capital is just a request for like golf carts or something. It's not really a project, it's just a lease. You know, some of this stuff is projects, like a road project.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's crossover because there are like pothole repairs, and it says there's it looks like there's $17,000 left in here for pothole repairs. Will this money come out of that, or is this a whole new? It's going to be a whole new line item on this capital project report.
Be a whole new line item.
So the potholes that have $17,000, what happens to that? It looks like, to me, it looks like there's also, that there's still $17,000 left in that fund for potholes repairs. Yeah, it should be, oh, Matt, it's on the agenda, the first agenda that was sent out with all the financials on it.
I think that was last year's, but I'll yield to Joel for that one.
So this is updated 12/31/2020. And that's what it says anyway.
Hey, Gene, were you wondering what would happen to a line item if we didn't spend it out? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, I'll just end up closing it. Then whatever we don't spend just gets reallocated back to roads for anything that could be spent, just out of the roads fund.
Okay, so it's not going to be continuing out of the same pot then?
No, that was our 2020 project for roads. You know, and this is initiating our 2021 project.
Okay, so everything on 2020, it's either it's gonna get closed out and put back into the capital funds then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Or it'll just come across into January too on the next reporting.
Okay. And then on this, hey AJ, on this 6,000 or 5,643, is this different from what I saw earlier? What $10,000 was asked for, and then another $30,000 request came by?
Yeah, this was, so Glenn was working to get us an actual estimate from the engineer. He had put 10 grand on this first capital request as kind of a placeholder. You know, we can move forward with the 10 grand if we want to give him some buffer, or we can adjust that. You know, we'll make the motion that includes the dollar amount and the fund that will be, you know, allocating that money from when we go to approve this when we're done discussing.
Okay, thank you.
So, you know, like I said, my initial thoughts would be to allocate the amount of money based on Tyler's cost estimate that we've received here. We can do some of that work, get it rolling, you know, and then if next meeting there's, you know, some additional funds that need to be requested, you know, we can move down that road then and have those, you know, that paperwork and that justification then.
I'll make that motion. I move that we approve the $5,643 for the pothole repairs project road evaluation.
Second.
From the, sorry, we got to add from the roads.
From the roads repair fund.
I noticed that an attendee has a hand up, but are they allowed to talk right now? I don't know how that works. In case it's pertinent to what we're voting on.
Well, there's
he sent an email over and he asked if normal for chat to be disabled, our community members not able to participate in conversation. I think we had chat has been, I think it's usually been disabled for the audience members. And we do have a community member at the community member comment period at the end of the meeting. But if John can go ahead and bring Kyle over if he wants to say something.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah,
when AJ, when there's a motion on the
Oh,
table.
yeah, we should probably, yeah, sorry, thank you.
You want to complete that motion first?
I thought I did. Okay.
So we just need to move for that amount of money to be allocated from the Capital Roads Fund for the 2021 roads repair project.
So moved.
I,
All right. So we can continue to discuss. Does anyone have any other questions or concerns regarding that? Yeah, you can, sorry, Robert's rules are confusing, but usually you make the motion, then you discuss. We kind of run a little bit more informal in our committee meetings and stuff, but
And the motion was for 6,000.
no, the 5,643 per the cost estimate that we received. Does anybody have concerns about that or any further discussion?
I just want to clarify the reason I picked that amount is because that road repair fund is very specific and has specific designations of dues that go to it. So I just want to make sure that we're very, very careful when we allocate those funds to something.
And that's why we got you the exact estimate, so you could do that. So.
And I think I support moving forward with a justified cost estimate from our consultant on this as well. All right, I guess if there's no further discussion, we can do the vote. All those in favor? So I get, Gail, what did you vote? Can't see here. Oh, you're muted, Gail, if you didn't know that. Maybe we lost her.
I'll see if I can prompt her to unmute.
Okay, it was an I, AJ, sorry.
Okay. So then it was unanimous.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, we have that out of the way. We can bring Kyle over quick if he wants to say something.
Yeah, I'll bring Kyle on over here. Kyle, we've brought you into the meeting. Feel free to go ahead and unmute.
Hi, first and foremost, I am a Ms., not a Mr.
Sorry.
Just to let you know. Actually, I think you somewhat answered my question. I was wondering why there was no competitive bid for the particular consultant services, and then wondering what your threshold for the bidding process was. And then just the deliverables on this, I wasn't able to see more than just the front page. So I was just curious to make sure that the deliverables, especially with the RFP packages and such, were satisfactory.
Okay. Yeah, Glenn has on the screen there, it was the tasks, and basically they'll be putting together kind of the initial package for getting the project up and running.
Okay,
And then
thank you.
the next version, when we bring this back in the change order process, will be much more in depth and have a lot more specifics to it. So
Can I ask why would you do it as a change order process? And also just to let you know, my background is I live in California, but I have a home up in Sudden Valley, obviously.
Mhm.
But I work for university facilities management.
Mhm.
So why would you do it as a change order process and not have an estimated budget for the full scope of the project?
At this point, we don't have like a full scope of the project. This is the development phase of the project to kind of scope out what needs to be designed. I call it a change order. That's kind of what Sudden Valley has used in nomenclature. Previously at my work, I typically call it a supplement, request for money. And basically you request your money for each phase of the project, and that's your planning phase, your engineering phase, your construction phase. If that makes sense. And that's what I kind of meant by change order. So, you know, this will get us to a certain point in this project, then we'll have to infuse some more funds in it to continue to move it forward.
Okay, thank you.
And a lot of it is just part of the transition, you know, we're going through management transition right now, and you know, trying to keep everything moving forward, and roads are always a priority for the community.
All right, thanks, Kyle. I've gone ahead and returned you to the attendees. And again, we'll have a kind of a property owner's comments at the end of the meeting here. So if you got something more, we'll check in with you later.
All right, so I'll turn it back over to Glenn, and we'll move on to the on-call engineering.
Okay, well, and some of this will help explain why we did it. We've been doing it. We started to do it this way. So the on-call engineering services is really for emergent issues that are unplanned for. We may have, you know, as an example, if we had a flooding from the snow and it took out a piece of our road, we would need to look at what's going on there and do some quick design work to make sure that we can get the road open and do it quickly without going through all of the process, because we can't delay. So that's what this is for. Traditionally, however, and this is something AJ and I talked about, is traditionally it was used as in place of what we just did. So what they would do is they would use some of this money and then reassign it later to the actual project. And that's problematic because sometimes it got reassigned and sometimes it didn't. So you weren't tracking your costs all the way through. So the reason that we're asking for this is because we never know when things are going to show up. And this money sits there for only those emergent issues that show up for us. Everything else we bring in front of you, like we just did the previous road services. We are asking for $30,000. That's based on, I know last year it was dropped to 20. Before that, it historically was around 30. My experience tells me that 30 can get us what we need in a couple of different instances. Usually, you can see from P&W's estimate that gets us a basic look at it. If we looked at some of the emergency we had at gate 28, we had it would have cost about, you know, I think the initial one, if I remember right, and Joel and AJ can correct me if I'm wrong, but that initial look at that one was around somewhere near 15 before they could decide what they were going to do. So that's the idea, is we're only going to come to you and ask you this annually, and you can certainly change the number, but that's where I got the 30,000 for. And again, we will only use this for those emergent issues, nothing else. With that, questions?
As a side note, I was wondering if people who are not speaking can mute themselves. We're getting a lot of background noise.
Yeah, Gail, you got some background noise.
Okay, where's my mute button here?
So this is Callie, since it's been a while since I've been involved in this process, when you actually spend the money, do you bring those back after the fact to explain what the money was spent on?
Whether that's been the process or not before, that's what we'll do. Okay. So if there was an emergent issue, I would spend the money, get the work done, and then I would update the committee and the board immediately that we had to use it, and then come back with the exact figure of what we used when we had it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and this is just more or less your unanticipated, you know, especially winter time, you never know what might happen if a drain clogs or a culvert clogs and, you know, washes out a chunk of your road or something. or anything like that.
Yep.
So I will make a motion that we approve $3,000 from the Capital Roads Fund for on-call engineering services to support the capital improvement program for 2021.
Second.
Does anybody have any further discussion on it or have any other questions?
Can you clarify how much you said?
30,000
Okay.
per Glenn's request.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, that would be, only used on an as needed basis. And
Sounded like you said 3,000, so I was like, how are you?
I thought I heard that too, so thank you.
and then, yeah, this is something we kind of historically have done over the years, but we've kind of always used it to like jumpstart projects as opposed to emergency issues. All right. There's no other discussion, then we'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Then any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
All right. So both those will be moved on to the next board meeting as being recommended from the Finance Committee.
Mhm.
All right. And then the next order of business is the 2020 Audit Engagement letter. So just a little bit of context. Last year, we had a different auditor and the board ended up deciding to terminate that auditor's contract. We did another RFP. They selected Larson Gross for the audit that you guys just received at your first meeting. And so now we need to get this next year's audit going. We were way behind on last year's audit as a result of the termination process with the previous auditor. And that's why you guys got an audit presentation on your first committee meeting. That should be happening with the budget in parallel with that being done. We should see the prior year's audit before, we're moving forward on presenting, a new budget. So we need to get those up and running. The thought process I went through with Glenn was, we went through an RFP process last year. For this, we selected Larson Gross as a board. So usually the Finance Committee, again, makes a recommendation to the board on the auditor. Normally, this would have been the last Finance Committee would already had this running. You guys obviously only worked with the last auditor so much as to just get a presentation from them and stuff. And obviously staff does a lot of the actual work with the auditor. My recommendation would be to move forward with Larson Gross for another year. This committee can then evaluate how they feel they performed over this new audit. And then we make a recommendation for the following year, whether we want to do another RFP process to compete for the services again. And so I asked Joel and Glenn to get an engagement letter from Larson Gross, which I believe when we did the RFP, you like sign up for 3 years, but it's not really 3 years because you have to sign a new letter every year. I don't know. It's a little bit confusing to me when it comes to contracts. It's not how I typically have handled contracts in my business, but it's kind of the way the auditors I've noticed and reserve consultants and stuff kind of do their work. So yeah, the engagement letter was provided in the email separate by Oryx, I think yesterday. Is there any questions about the audit process in general? We want to get this process rolling sooner rather than later this year so we can catch back up to the normal schedule we should be on for getting the auditor on board and working. Allie?
the only question I have is whether that 28,000 seems reasonable and consistent with prior years. I know we've worked with Larson Gross in the past, and they've got a good reputation. I was just wondering if those fees are in line.
I'll let Joel or Glenn, they may have access to that. I believe we were like 27-ish last year, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, which is not reliable. So
Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, those fees are in line with prior years. For example, just of course off the top of my head, I know for the Newman audit, that was approximately 25,000 for it. Larson Gross was about, for the first year. So typically, like what AJ said, is when the auditors bid for the audit, they give you like a 3-year quote, meaning you stick with us over the next 3 years, this is what it'll be typically. And so for Larson Gross is approximately, I want to say around 27.5. There's another 5,000 because they had to do out of scope work to basically audit the ending 2018 numbers to get comfortable with the beginning 2019 numbers. But in terms of the end scope work, it was about 27.5, 27.5, right in that range. So this $28,000 that for this year, that's the audit and the federal tax return, Form 990 work as well. So there will be 2 letters that you guys will basically be approving to sign tonight. It would be the audit agreement letter, what's called the engagement letter, and the tax agreement letter as well. They're kind of, it's basically bundled into the bid.
But what happens? What happens if you don't stay 3 years with them? Then so it's 27.5 at 3 years. If for some reason, do they bill you an extra amount, or is that just what it is?
If you don't stay with them?
Yeah. Bail out early.
Well, like for example, we basically cut away from Newman, so there's no penalty, so to speak, for like not re-engaging them.
Okay.
It would just be the extra cost would just come into if you're engaging a new auditor and maybe they would charge you more. It's just the unknown factor right there.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that maybe you got a deal because you were with them for 3 years, but
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think one thing you could see, Gene, is if we've used Larson and Gross a lot over the years, I believe, going back before Newman even for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing I could see, if you cut out of those engagements like early, maybe they just stop providing you proposals because they don't want to work for you, because they do want you to work for them for 3 years, but they've worked with us for so long, I don't think they would, and they would be able to submit a proposal, as well. It's not like they're excluded from submitting just because they worked with us previously, so. And so is there any other further discussion on that topic? Does anyone have any issues with moving forward with Larson Gross for another year? All right, so what is the motion that we need to make? Sorry, I should have been a bit more prepared on that front.
Is it approving the tax letter and the audit?
Joel, is the engagement letter inclusive of both of those, the audit and the tax letter, so we could just move to approve the engagement letter?
There are 2 separate letters, one for the audit and one for the tax. And both of those letters are included in the same attachment as an addendum that's posted to the website. That
Okay.
So whatever you got mailed, the tax would just follow the audit engagement letter.
Okay. So we can just say I move to approve to the board the 2020 audit engagement letter and the 2020 tax return engagement letter with Larson and Gross.
Yeah.
Does that sound accurate, Joel?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Do we have a second?
Second
All right, any further discussion on those? All those in favor? What say you, Gail?
In favor.
Okay. All right, so I will now hand it over to Joel to go over the December financials.
Oh, let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm starting out on page 6 in your packet. And like what I did last time and also for the last board meeting, I'm just going to keep this screen up so I can go through the statements. It's just proven to be a lot easier. Well, I should have done this sooner. So it was a good recommendation on Kim's part to do this. So page 6 here, this is just the balance sheet. This is just a snapshot. Assets, liabilities, equities. Here, like I told you back in last month in November, the SURF loan, you'll notice right here, has dropped, and that's because of actually, there's the payment right there. I'm just basically signifying that I'm transferring this out of the equity section of operations and putting it into the capital section as directed by the board a couple months ago. And so you'll see the SURF loan dropping in relation to that amount, that 105,114 that transferred from operating cash to pay down the SURF loan. So down here, you're just saying, basically now in the accounting equation side of it, just transferring money from that same amount from operating equity to capital equity to balance that out. But in terms of like the balance sheet, everything looks fine in the balance sheet. Of course, there is that PPP loan liability right here, which is so we're on the docket this year. That's one of the things we'll be doing is applying for that loan forgiveness. And this cash right here, this $357,700 is up in here. So it's commingled in this operating cash portion up here. And that's in another one of our bank accounts that we haven't, it's just been sitting there. We haven't touched it ever since it came to us back in May of last year. So turning the page now to page 7 in your pack.
Why haven't we touched it?
What's that?
Why haven't we touched it?
Oh, it's just the amount that we got for the SURF loan, $357,000, it's just been basically set aside. We haven't gotten into it just in case for some reason maybe wanted to be sent back, or if not all of it was forgiven, but
if we get the forgiveness, you can count anything that qualifies as coming out of that amount.
Yeah. Yes. Now, in terms of cash overall, though, it's basically, all the accounts are added together in this bucket up here for operating cash, with the exception of things like emergency operating on UDR and building deposits. But it's basically kind of like, yes, it's in a different account, but I've just basically just kind of left that alone. Like, I haven't been transferring any of that around to anything else over time. Now, when it's forgiven in this year, in 2021, the portion that's forgiven, which hopefully we anticipate all of it will be forgiven, basically then that will become income to us in 2021. It'll be like a debt forgiveness type income. And so it'll show right up in the 2021 income statement, it'll come in as an income amount, which will basically increase that bottom line net income number for 2021. So that's how it's going to show up, like in the Sudden Valley financial statements. So instead of basically, from a balance sheet perspective, instead of it being a loan liability, then it becomes equity at that point to us and shows up on the income statement. Now, in terms for the income statement, now we're looking at all of 2020. So we're looking at the December 2020 numbers. I put, work to put pretty much every closing entry that can especially apply to operations at this point into 2020. So this is a pretty all-inclusive number right here. So what you're seeing is for the year a net loss of $77,237. Now, to put that into perspective, in terms of like April, so in April, when the dues were waived for April, that was approximately $200,000 of budgeted dues that got waived. Now, if those dues weren't waived, then we'd actually be looking at net income of approximately 122,000 is what it would look like if those dues weren't waived in April. So now last year in 2019, for some perspective, at the end of 2019, we had 128,717 in net income. And but that also includes in 2019 as well, approximately about $95,000 was used for snow removal, was spent out of the UDR fund. So in 2019, in the operating section here, you basically deflected 95,000 away of it and put it down into this UDR fund right here. So basically, I guess if that wasn't done in 2019, then instead of $128,000 net income, you would be looking at more like a $34,000 net income. I mean, back in 2019. So that just kind of gives you a little perspective of this 77, what is coming in as a $77,000 net loss. So if the dues weren't waived in April, you'd be looking at about $122,000 of net income. And in 2020, also all the snow removal, which by the time you pay for like wages for snow removal and materials and contractor fees and that sort of stuff, that was approximately around $95,000 in 2020. And that was all spent out of the maintenance fund. So the operating section bore the full brunt of that in 2020. In terms of expenses, so total expenses, approximately $41,000 over budget. Last year, at the end of 2019, they were approximately $296,000 over budget expenditure-wise. Collection rate right here. So we finished out the year collection rate wise for 95.5%. Last month in November, I said it was 95.1%, but it's one of the closing procedures. We ended up basically wiping away some lots that got foreclosed on through foreclosure procedures. So that removing those from the accounts then actually raised the collection rate just a hair to 95.5%. In November, year-to-date November is 94.9%. October year-to-date, it was 94.5%. So October 94.5, then it went to 94.9, then we're ending out the year at 95.5%. So that collection rate is actually pretty good given the fact of course, I didn't know, I don't think really anyone really knew how this collection rate would pan out in 2020 with everything that happened last year. Now, if you turn the page to page 8, I mean, there's really not too much to go over, but since we've been talking about, let's see if I can move this. Since we've been talking about the roads capital projects that you guys were just approving. So now this is in your packet for the year ending 2020, and this has all the capital projects on here that have not been closed out yet, meaning like, for example, these closed things. These will be closed out as also some further capital year-end procedures. But it really doesn't matter anyways, because as you see, there are no funds obligated anymore since these projects are deemed done. So basically anything that's open for CERF, it starts off with whatever the board approved, how much we've been invoiced so far, and how much we have left to spend out of those approved projects. And this has everything on here. The only thing that I noticed that's not on here would be the golf carts that were the golf carts that we just took in from the capital lease. We haven't made any expenditures out of that yet, but that's a 5-year lease anyway. So even when it goes on here, really only 1/5 of that would be spent every single year. So it wouldn't change anything by drastically too much. But you're looking at for CERF 225,262 of obligated funds. And then in relation to how that would work on this sheet right here, you'll see right here, there's the $225,262 of obligated funds expected to be spent out of SURF. So that's basically how this works. It just starts off with beginning cash here, and then just the dues that we've taken in, you know, like interest income, sale of assets, your expenditures. Now, what this means by expenditure-wise, basically all the money that you paid out on capital project invoices coming through. And then the big thing is the obligated expenses. And then this is what gives you your net usable cash balance at 12/31/2020, 1.6 million approximately for SURF. Then when you take away that $600,000, this is basically just the board recommended balance, you know, to not drop under, then you'd have net usable cash of 990,000. But this 600,000, you know, that doesn't mean that you can drop under that. It's just, that's just the guideline right now. The following page is roads. Same sort of drill with this. All the roads projects that have been approved that are still open and that still have invoices that were balance or invoices that we expect to come in and be charged against the project. Total bottom line, this is how much you have that you would spend out of roads if everything were expended from those projects, which then traces back to right here. And the same thing with UDR, just has some miscellaneous things on here. Now, some of these things, these are old projects. I haven't seen any more billings come through, like, and some of these could probably just be taken off altogether at this point. But it doesn't affect UDR by that much. But all these balances, as you can expect from last year in 2019, since we haven't been doing a lot of spending on capital projects, are up versus how they looked at December 2019. So this is just, this page is just a function of how much money you took in dues wise, how many projects you've approved, and that's really what drives this cash sheet for your, it's like a snapshot of reserve funds that you have available. If we turn the next page to page 9, now at this point in the year, since we have a full year end, of course, looking at 1 month is not as necessarily useful anymore at this point, but we'll just look at it. So for golf, we have approximately $21,000 of revenue. Last year, they had close to it, about $24,500 in revenue for December. Their expenses this year is $78,649 for the month. Last year was $57,117. Net income, net loss of $57,635. Last year, net loss of $32,621. That's only for the month of December. Now, there's some things that will affect this, like this year versus last year. So like one thing that I do is accrue wages payable at the end of for 2020. So it's an approximation in terms of how many working days we had. So basically, the first payroll of January of this year, 90% of that got kicked back into 2020. And then, so like if you look at January of 2020, you'll see there's a lighter payroll there too, since another accrual took place where it kicked back about 70% of that into 2019. So January kind of makes it, it was made up for in January, so to speak. It all even smooths itself out over the years. So the important statement to look at this point would be page 10, which, so now we're looking at the income statement again in terms of, so like that net operations, that 77,237 loss right here, you could tie that right back directly to right here. And then what this page does year to date is showing you how you got to this number on a departmental basis. So here are the net income losses for the different departments as you see over here. Then over here would be the basically better, worse than budget over here as well. Now the thing that would stand out would be this maintenance right here, negative $137,000. Of course, I talked about with the weather related costs back in 2019 being spent out of UDR. So you have about $95,000 in snow removal expenses that maintenance just shouldered altogether this year. which is the main factor behind driving this deficit right, or just a worse than budget number right here. Now in terms of, for golf, so we had approximately $924,000 of revenue. Last year in 2019, we had $908,000 in revenue. So that's pretty good given the fact that golf was shut down for approximately a month or so back in around March during the pandemic shutdown. So we're still better revenue-wise by about $15,670 for golf. Expenditure-wise, golf had 800. Now, when I say expenditure, I'm looking at this column. So I'm looking at the actual salary benefits column number here, and then the actual other expenses right here. So this, and then this number right here would come up to total expenses. So total expenses for golf year to date, $869,616. Last year it was $898,382. So there was a decrease in expenditures of about $28,766. Of course, now you'd also expect to see a decrease in expenditures while they were shut down, which they did as well back in March. And same thing with the rec department too, in terms of when they're being shut down this whole time, approximately about $50,000 in savings for like wages, and then well, actually I could just quickly now. What I'm looking at right here, anyone can see this full report that I've got. This is on the Finance Committee website. So it's, if you just clicked on that link to the financial statements for the month for December, you have exactly what I'm looking at. So it's like this full-blown statement. So like, for example, which is really handy if someone is, oh, like maintenance and landscaping, this one's over budget, $53,743. You could scroll down here, and then these, especially these following pages after the year to date departmental summary, you could go right to the maintenance and landscaping section. So there's that over budget amount. And then these are the different categories that are driving the numbers here for expenses. And then you could also, if you wanted to, you could scroll past this and you could scroll right to the individual department web page, or income statement. So like we went right to maintenance. Okay, so now we're into maintenance. So now you're looking at the actual income statement only for the maintenance department. So like the payroll salary, so there's the weather response. You'll see these amounts here driving over budget amounts for weather response. Then if we scroll down here, the more weather response right here, 54,580 driving this variance. And then there's that total variance, 137,058, which tied back to this sheet. Right here. So it's a good way of, like, if anyone is ever curious of what's driving a particular number, you could literally just follow it right down to the individual departmental income statement. And it goes, and it's broken out even on the GL level as well. So you were actually looking at, down in the maintenance statement, GL line items is what you were looking at. With that, I would say what are the highlights for the December statements, if anyone had any questions about those.
I have a question about if and when our PPP loan is forgiven, are there plans to pay lost wages from, like you just mentioned, we had a savings in wages during the shutdown, but isn't that kind of the intention of that PPP loan?
Well, the PPP loan forgiveness will be determined based off of our total wages number. So it won't be like the wages that were lost, but the wages that we actually paid out during our performance period.
Right, but like, wouldn't that in theory, wouldn't that pay people for wages?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
But I mean, if like the lost wage, like the wages that they lost, like we could pay them for that.
Oh, well, actually, when I say lost wages, I just mean like when the rec center, so the rec center hasn't been open, during this time.
I know, but a lot of places were using that to keep their people on payroll and allow their employees to continue paying their bills, because even though things were shut down, they still had bills to pay.
Yeah, these like for the rec center, those are seasonal positions that run the rec center during that time of the year when they're open. So like the rec.
Closed because of the pandemic.
Say that again, Cara.
You're saying they weren't closed because of the pandemic.
Oh, if you mean if we kept it open, is that what you mean?
So places that were closed because of the pandemic, they were able to continue paying wages while they were closed using PPP loan funds.
Yeah, of course, we would have to literally put them on payroll and keep them on payroll and pay them to do that. Now, people who were on payroll would be the rec manager until she left. She left here and took another job elsewhere. So we did have some, meaning her in particular, who was on payroll while she was still here before she accepted a position elsewhere.
So I guess you're saying we don't have people that were on payroll for Sudden Valley who were not paid during the pandemic.
That we didn't have people on payroll who were not paid?
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, there was like a brief period, especially when the golf course was shut down, where unfortunately they were laid off during that time period. And then they were brought on when the golf course reopened. So we did have some people, they would be probably the primary ones. And then I guess kind of back to your point, also the big thing would be rec centers. So the big difference in payroll would be all the seasonal staff who would have come on to open the rec center and run it. They were not brought on since the rec center was not open.
Do we have any other questions on the financials? Did that answer your question, Kara? Or I think basically what you're trying to get at was if we were able to pay people that had to be laid off as a result of the pandemic.
Well, I mean, I thought that was the point of the PPP loan, was to keep people on payroll and be able to continue to pay our payroll. But I guess we didn't keep people on payroll, so hopefully they got some unemployment or something that helped them to pay their bills.
I honestly can't speak to exactly that, so I would have to rely on staff.
And we can look into that a little further, but I think that was one of the key things that PPP was for sure. And most of those.
Go ahead.
And most of those folks kept them on through the PPP loan rather than back paying them. So I don't know whether we could do that or not, but I get your point. I get what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, I guess
we're making out in the deal. Like, we're getting money to pay people that we didn't lose too much in income, and some people just.
I think one of the things is you'll have to show how the money was used or not. We used it. We had a business. My husband does, and we used the PPP to pay the employees. But I think you're going to have to show that that's what you use the money for.
Yeah.
So if you don't use that money, it may have to go back to the government. I don't know, but that was my assumption.
The PPP loan forgiveness will be calculated, or it'll be based on basically our FTEs and how much money we paid during our performance period. And then that will drive there are some like other little things you could spend it on, like utilities and rent. Of course, we don't pay rent. So for us, the big thing would be payroll and some utilities.
We'll put together some more information on how the PPP loans will be dispersed.
Yeah, we'll get that for you at the next meeting.
I mean, so it makes sense that it would cover the April or whatever when we waived dues, but like besides that, we weren't too, like we had a slight amount of less collections, but I don't know, it just seems like we're making money on the deal, and there's some people that were, unemployed on the deal, but I would like to see more information for sure.
We will get that to you for sure.
Does anyone else have any other questions or discussions? All right. Well, I think we can move on then to property owner comments. So,
Yeah, Joel, I'll go ahead and end your sharing there.
we had a couple questions already.
Yep, a couple of hands went right up. Looks like Leslie's at the top of the list there. I'll go ahead and bring her on over. And Leslie, I brought you into the meeting.
Okay, I just unmuted. A couple of things on the capital request. The first one that you made, you had a 10% contingency on that. What would be the contingency on estimating how much time you were going to take for something? Would this be for taking longer, or why are you allowing a contingency on this?
Well, he's going to drive every street, so there's things that can impact how they get here, and so there are costs there. And also, he's going to put together bid documents. So if they're a bigger package than he initial thought, because we had more damage, that's the contingency. Those two factors.
I had just typically thought of it as when you're doing construction or something, if you ran into problems and, not finding rot or something like that. Okay. The other one is, now this is something that I heard somebody say, I have no idea if it's true, but I want to understand the concept on this. Somebody said that during the snowstorm, somebody said they were working 18 hours. That says to me overtime. Are we paying overtime?
Absolutely. If they work it, we have to pay it. Yeah.
I wasn't aware we were paying overtime. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Leslie. I'll go ahead and return you to the attendees here. And we've got Kyle up again. Go ahead and bring Kyle on over. And we've got you in the meeting here now. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi. Yeah, and I think you may have already answered it, but back to the, is it the PPE loan, the $357,000? I would imagine that you would need to substantiate the loan forgiveness there, if there is loan forgiveness. My question is, would the $200,000 loss in dues revenue qualify? Because that was a voluntary decision made by the board at the time. So I'm just curious if that $200,000 would qualify for reimbursement. And then specific to the losses, are there losses because of the loss of revenue in terms of like golf that, is not being offset? Because I'll use the gym as an example. I do know, I won't get on a soapbox about the gym. My daughter is very sad that it remains closed, obviously, amongst others, but we're still paying. If we've got the PPE loan and we're paying salaries, and we've also had salary savings through regular attrition and folks leaving, and our dues have not changed, and our dues typically cover all these costs, I'm wondering where the losses are.
I can answer. Okay, so for the PPP, I think you asked, could the dues that we waived be a part of factoring our PPP loan forgiveness? And the answer to that would be no. It's only going to be based off of how much we paid, and especially in our case, and wages, FTE wages, and we could also include some utilities in that. So that's would be what factors into the forgiveness amount.
Except Joel, from my understanding, it's not going to be, we're not going to be reimbursed for that 200,000, but it could make up for that 200,000 in that we're
Oh,
paying.
sure, yeah. Meaning, yeah, exactly. It would make up for it, and yes, you could indirectly think about it making up for that, since it will show up as an income line item in 2021.
Does that answer your concern, Kyle?
Yes and no, but that's all right.
Okay. Anybody else have any more information for her, or I'll go ahead and otherwise I'll return you to the attendees. You could perhaps email somebody on the finance committee if you had further questions.
Yeah, and I'll also I'll access the documents and take a closer look at them so I didn't have time to do that before the meeting. So thank you.
Sure thing. All right. You have a good night now. I'll go ahead
You
and
too.
move you back to the attendees. And Linda's up. We'll go ahead and bring Linda on over. And you're welcome to unmute at this time.
Can you hear me?
Sure can, Linda.
Well, I was using my computer, but sometimes when people share their documents, my computer locks. There's something on my program up there that locks me out. My question is for Joel. I want to confirm, when I read the letter from Larson Gross for the audit, I understood that to be the 28,000 was only for the audit. It says that, and it makes that very clear that it doesn't include the doing our tax return. And then there was a separate section for that, but there was no cost given for that. It had to do with them billing us for hours they needed to do it. So can you confirm what they were saying there?
Muted,
Joel, I
Joel.
believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and like you, Linda, when I first saw that too, I actually went back and looked at their bid, their quote bid, and it stated on the quote bid that it includes the Form 990 tax return as well.
Okay, it's just because if you read that, the statement that they have to us, it doesn't. And I was just concerned because we went way over this year for our audited stuff.
Yeah, and then like with that, approximately 5,000 of that was for, well, a little over 5,000 was extra billing for out of scope work for the ending 2018 numbers, balance sheet numbers.
Okay, the only other thing I have is back in October, and AJ finally forwarded it to Glenn. There were some items I thought we had taken out of operational expense that should have been capital for some parks work and that sort of thing. And I haven't heard back from anybody yet, because can we still be adjusting our 2020s to not have such a loss for the year?
Yeah, Linda, me and Glenn and Joel are working on, a plan for that. So
I'm just, I haven't heard from anybody. I know Glenn initially sent me some stuff, but there was that whole Gate 28 thing that was sitting out there that we closed a project with $32,000 in it and then started charging charges for fixing it this year when it, out of operations. I just, I think there's places where we could be doing some adjusting that we wouldn't have a $70,000 loss for the year.
yeah,
Just
we're working
Okay.
on that.
Okay. That's all I got.
All right. Thanks, Linda. You have a good night now.
Night.
Okay. I think that's our 3 attendees, unless they've got anything else for us. Everybody got a say in tonight.
All right. Well, I think that's all we got for this evening. So if we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate